For centuries, the British royal family lived by one iron rule. Never complain, never explain, no matter the accusations. But in March 2021, Meghan Markle walked into Oprah Winfrey's garden and blew that rule to pieces. She sat down, looked into the camera, and condemned the entire royal family in front of 61 million people. Millions pitied her. She made people cry. The palace said nothing. But then the critics started digging. And what they pulled out of the ground was ugly. Lie after lie after lie, spoken deliberately on the biggest platform in the world. Now Oprah has seen enough. The woman who handed Meghan that microphone is breaking her silence, and she is taking Meghan's secrets out one by one. Things are about to get very dark. The interview that shook the world. The night was March 7, 2021, and 61 million people around the world sat down in front of their televisions and waited. What they were about to watch had been sold to them as the most honest royal conversation in history. The Duchess sat in a sun-drenched garden in Santa Barbara, California, across from the most powerful interviewer on the planet, with no rules telling her what she could and could not say. For 2 hours, everything that had been locked behind closed royal doors was about to come flooding out. And what came out of that garden would not just shake the British monarchy to its foundation. It would set off a chain reaction that nobody, not the palace, not Hollywood, and certainly not Oprah Winfrey herself, could have seen coming. Meghan sat down first, alone and composed. And within the first few minutes of the interview, she told Oprah she had been naive walking into royal life. That she barely knew who the royals were before she met Harry. That she had no real understanding of what she was getting into. It sounded like the confession of a woman who had been blindsided. It sounded honest. It sounded real. It was the first lie of the night. Because her childhood best friend, Nanaki Pretty, a woman who had known Meghan since they were both 2 years old, had already told a different story 4 years earlier. In 2017, Pretty told the Mail Online that she was always fascinated by the royal family, that she wants to be Princess Diana 2.0, and that it was like she had been planning this all her life. Pretty also revealed that Meghan watched Princess Diana's wedding on videotape over and over as a child, that her friends bought her British-themed gifts because her obsession was that well known. She went further and revealed that Meghan kept Diana's biography on her shelf. And on her own public blog in 2014, 4 years before she married Harry, Meghan herself had written about the royal wedding and Princess Kate. The woman claiming she knew nothing about the royals had been studying them her entire life, but the world did not know that yet. So, they kept watching. Then came the bombs. Meghan told Oprah she had experienced suicidal thoughts during her time as a working royal. Thinking of harming yourself? Were you having suicidal thoughts? Yes. This was very, very clear. She had begged the institution for help and cruelly got turned away. She revealed that she sat alone at night with thoughts so dark she could not speak them out loud. The audience was already gripped. And then Meghan moved to something that had been burning in the British press for years. 4 months before the interview, every major UK newspaper had been reporting the same story. That during the stressful bridesmaid dress fitting for Princess Charlotte's wedding in 2018, Meghan had reduced Catherine to tears. It had become one of the defining stories of their falling out. Catherine the victim, Meghan the difficult one. That story had circulated so long and so widely that most of the world had accepted it as fact. Then Meghan looked directly at Oprah and said the reverse happened. She said Catherine had been the one who caused the tears, not her. She said Catherine had shown upset over the flower girl dresses and that it was Meghan who had been left crying and hurt. And then with the same calm voice, she called Catherine a good person who had since apologized with flowers. That combination was devastating. By calling Catherine good while placing the blame on her, Meghan appeared forgiving and gracious while simultaneously painting Catherine as the aggressor in a story the whole world already knew. And because the royal family's strict code required Catherine to never complain and never explain herself publicly, Catherine could not respond. She could not correct the record. She could not defend herself. She had to sit in silence while 61 million people absorbed a version of events she had no power to challenge. And then came the moment that stopped the world completely. Meghan told Oprah that while she was pregnant with Archie, an unnamed member of the royal family had raised concerns and conversations about how dark their baby's skin might be. That was relayed to me from Harry. She said those were conversations that family had with him. She refused to say who, saying that would be very damaging to them. She quickly added when Harry joined and Oprah pressed him. He said that conversation I am never going to share. But at the time it was awkward. I was a bit shocked. When Oprah asked if he could say what the question was, he said flatly, "No, I'm not comfortable with sharing that." 2 years later in 2023, royal author Omid Scobie published a book about the royal family. The Dutch translation was pulled from shelves in the Netherlands because it reportedly named 2 specific people involved in that Archie conversation, names that then spread across social media worldwide: King Charles and the Princess of Wales. The claim that had been kept anonymous for 2 years suddenly had faces. The palace issued a response the next day on behalf of Queen Elizabeth II. It read, "The whole family is saddened to learn the full extent of how challenging the last few years have been for Harry and Meghan. The issues raised, particularly that of race, are concerning. While some recollections may vary, they are taken very seriously and will be addressed by the family privately." 5 words buried inside that statement, "some recollections may vary," were the quietest and most devastating counterstrike the monarchy had ever delivered. The world moved on to the next headline, but the fact-checkers had already started going back through the footage, pulling the legal records, checking the dates, and what they found was about to tear the whole story apart. The lies that unraveled live. Within days of the interview airing, while the applause was still going, the stories Meghan had told Oprah began to collapse because of video footage, a church official who had no choice but to speak, and a paper trail Meghan had left on the internet herself. Start with the blanket. During the interview, Meghan described a warm, tender moment from her first joint engagement with Queen Elizabeth II in Cheshire in June 2018. She said that while riding in the royal car, the Queen noticed she was cold and pulled a lap blanket over her knees. It was a grandmother's gesture, a sign of deep personal closeness. She placed it right next to her portrayal of other royals as cold and distant. The contrast was deliberate. Analysts pulled the footage from that day in Cheshire and went through it frame by frame. What they found was completely shocking. The Queen placed the blanket over her own lap. At no point did she share it with Meghan. Meghan sat beside her with her arms crossed. No blanket, no shared warmth, none of it. This was not a small mistake in a long interview. This was a manufactured moment of intimacy with the most senior person in the entire royal family, invented and delivered to 61 million people as personal proof that Meghan had earned in months what others had spent years building. Then there was the backyard wedding claim. And this one had legal consequences that went far beyond a simple he said she said. During the interview, Meghan told Oprah that 3 days before the public royal wedding at St. George's Chapel at Windsor Castle, she and Harry had already secretly married, just the 2 of them in their backyard, with only the Archbishop of Canterbury present. She said they had called him privately and exchanged their real vows there, away from the cameras and the crowds. She described the massive public ceremony that the world had watched, the one that cost £32 million and was paid for by British taxpayers, as a spectacle for the world, suggesting that the backyard exchange was the true marriage and the grand state ceremony was essentially a performance staged for public consumption. The problem was that under English law, a legal marriage cannot take place in a private backyard. It requires 2 witnesses, a licensed venue and a registrar or official license to perform the ceremony in that specific location. A private exchange of words in a garden, however heartfelt, has 0 legal standing, which meant that what Meghan was describing was either not a real marriage at all or it had never actually happened. The Archbishop of Canterbury's office was forced to issue a public clarification. And what the Archbishop said did not just contradict Meghan. It stopped just short of calling her account impossible. He stated, "The legal wedding was on the Saturday. I signed the wedding certificate, which is a legal document, and I would have committed a serious criminal offense if I signed it knowing it was false." What he was saying in plain terms was this. The only wedding he had any part in was the public ceremony at Windsor Castle on the Saturday. If there had been a separate legal wedding in a backyard that he had officiated and he had then signed the Windsor certificate as though that were the legal marriage, he would have been committing a crime. He was a senior churchman publicly protecting himself from criminal association with Meghan's claim on the record in front of the entire world. Then there were the headlines, and this was where the manipulation stopped being verbal and became visual. During the interview, Oprah showed a montage of British newspaper headlines on screen. The montage was presented as hard evidence, proof that the British press had subjected Meghan to a sustained racist campaign so vicious and so relentless that she and Harry had no choice but to leave the country. The message was clear. Here is what they did to her in black and white with their own words. But journalists and researchers who went back through those headlines after the interview aired found something that should never have made it past a single fact-checker. One of the headlines shown in that montage was from a column titled "The Real Problem with Meghan Markle. She just doesn't speak our language." It was placed in the montage as a piece of racist British press coverage that had driven Meghan out. But when researchers tracked down the actual article, they found two things that destroyed that framing entirely. First, the column had nothing to do with race. It was written about Meghan's use of what the writer described as hippie corporate management speak, her communication style, not her skin color. Second, and far more damaging, that column had been published in December 2020, 11 months after Harry and Meghan had already publicly announced their decision to leave the royal family. It could not possibly have been part of the press campaign that forced them out because they had already left by the time it was written. And it did not stop there. Associated Newspapers, the publisher behind the Daily Mail, sent legal letters to both CBS and Harpo Productions after the interview aired. Those letters documented 3 specific instances where Daily Mail headlines had been altered before being shown on screen and 9 separate cases where headlines from foreign publications, magazines, and websites from outside the UK had been presented in the montage as though they were British press. In other words, headlines from other countries had been dropped into a montage designed to show British racism with nothing to indicate they had not come from British newspapers at all. Associated Newspapers demanded the misleading content be corrected or removed. Harpo Productions refused, releasing a statement that read simply, "We stand by the broadcast in its entirety." The headlines shown to 61 million people as undeniable proof of a British racist press campaign had been curated, some of them altered, at least one written after the couple had already gone, and several of them were not even British. And Oprah's own production company looked at all of that and stood by every frame. Then there was the chicken coop segment, and this one was a masterclass in staged authenticity. During the interview, a segment aired showing Meghan in casual clothes at a rustic chicken coop in the garden of their Montecito estate. She was relaxed, warm, and completely at home feeding chickens, pointing to a painted sign that read Archie's Chickens. It presented a picture of a humble woman who had walked away from palace life and found simple happiness in California. It was designed to make the audience feel that what they were watching was real life, unfiltered and unscripted. But investigators looking into the segment found that the Archie's Chicken sign, the freshly painted fencing, and the entire setup of the coop had been installed just days before the interview. The same woman who had accused the palace of manufacturing her image had manufactured her own in her own garden on Oprah's platform for the same audience she was asking to believe her. Every single thing that was supposed to make Meghan's story unbreakable was breaking. And behind the scenes of Harpo Productions, someone had already seen the red flags long before any of this went public. Someone who had been in that garden, who had watched every minute of those 3 hours and 20 minutes, who had let it air, and who was now furious when Meghan turned on Oprah. Nobody talked about what happened inside Harpo Productions before that interview aired. Not loudly, not on record, but it happened. And it was the moment everything between Oprah Winfrey and Meghan Markle began to die. Meghan's team had requested a final look at the edit before it went to air. In professional journalism, that request does not exist. You do not give an interview subject the power to review the cut, adjust the framing, and reshape the story before the world sees it. That is not an interview. That is a press release with better lighting. And Oprah Winfrey, a woman who had interviewed presidents, world leaders, and the most powerful people on earth for decades, had never once granted that to anyone. The request told Oprah everything she needed to know. This was not a raw, honest conversation. It was a controlled media project. Oprah realized she had not been chosen as an interviewer. She had been chosen as a launchpad. The indignation was not immediate or public, but it was decisive, and it was only the beginning because the Sussexes did not just do this to Oprah. They did it to everyone. In December 2020, Harry and Meghan signed a $20 million deal with Spotify. It was a staggering amount of money built entirely on the promise of their post-royal brand. What they delivered in return was 12 episodes of Meghan's podcast called Archetypes, which explored stereotypes used against women. 12 episodes. That was it. No Harry podcast, no further content. And in 2023, after nearly 3 years of silence from their side of the deal, Spotify ended the partnership entirely. What came next was the part nobody in their team had prepared for. Bill Simmons, the head of podcast innovation at Spotify, one of the executives who had been inside that deal, went on his own podcast and said, I wish I had been involved in the Meghan and Harry leave Spotify negotiation, The Grifters, that's the podcast we should have launched with them. He then revealed that he had once spent time on a Zoom call with Harry trying to help him develop a podcast concept and described the entire experience with open contempt as one of my best stories. He was not a tabloid journalist. He was the man who had been paid to make them work, and he was laughing about it on the internet. Then, at a 2023 industry conference, UTA CEO Jeremy Zimmer stood in front of a room full of the most powerful people in the entertainment business and said turns out Meghan Markle was not a great audio talent or necessarily any kind of talent. Just because you're famous doesn't make you great at something. This was not a critic or a royal commentator. This was the chief executive of one of the biggest talent agencies in Hollywood, saying out loud what the industry had already decided in private. These were not British tabloids. These were the American executives who had taken their money, tried to build with them, and come away with nothing but frustration and a very good story to tell at conferences. And Netflix, the company paying them a reported $100 million, found out about the Oprah interview from the news. Sources confirmed that many inside Netflix were deeply annoyed to discover at the last minute that the couple they had committed $100 million to were about to drop the most explosive media event of their post-royal career on a competing network. Nobody had called. Nobody had warned them. The people funding the empire found out from a headline. In 2024, the Archwell team arrived at Sundance Film Festival with money to spend and a clear ambition to attach the Sussex name to prestigious projects that would rebuild their credibility in the industry. They made serious offers on multiple high-profile documentaries, including a film about the life of Christopher Reeve, the beloved actor who had spent years paralyzed after a horse-riding accident before his death. In 2004. It was exactly the kind of meaningful human story that would have looked perfect under the Archwell banner. The filmmakers turned them down and sold the documentary to Warner Brothers instead for $15 million, which was actually less money than Archwell had offered. The filmmakers had looked at two offers, chosen the smaller one, and walked away from the Sussex money without hesitation. In the film industry, that kind of rejection does not happen by accident. You do not leave money on the table unless the name attached to the higher offer is itself a problem. One insider who had worked with the couple described the experience plainly. Harry and Meghan made the collaborative process very hard to the point that there was no collaboration at all. And back inside Harpo Productions, Oprah had watched the freshly painted chicken coop appear on screen. She had watched the Archie's chicken sign that had been installed days before filming. She had watched a segment designed to look like a life being lived performed for her cameras inside her interview on her platform. To a veteran producer who had spent decades distinguishing genuine emotion from manufactured performance, it was not charming. It was a red flag. The clearest possible signal that her guest was not sharing a truth, but constructing one. But it was a secret Meghan had shared with her off-camera that truly put Oprah on quiet alert. Meghan had confided privately that at certain royal gatherings she had deliberately refused to curtsy to Queen Elizabeth II because she felt it was beneath her as an American woman and that she had laughed about it with friends afterward. It was a small thing, a petty thing. But to Oprah, who had spent decades reading people for a living, it was deeply revealing. Because a woman who could look the world in the eye and speak about the pain of royal life while privately laughing about disrespecting the Queen at her own gatherings was not a woman sharing her truth. She was a woman performing it. And from that moment, Oprah knew she had to be very careful around her. The damage from the fabrications had not just hit Meghan's credibility, it had hit Oprah's. The most trusted interviewer in America had aired a story that was falling apart in public, and she had done it because she had been used. She would not make that mistake twice. The silence that said everything. In Hollywood, powerful people do not end relationships by fighting. They end them by going quiet. They stop showing up. They stop posting. They stop saying the name. And they trust that everyone who matters will notice. What followed the 2021 interview was not a dramatic falling out between Oprah and Meghan. It was something slower, colder, and far more permanent than that. It started with a podcast moment so small that most people almost missed what it meant. In late 2025, Oprah appeared as a guest on Kelly Ripa's podcast called Let's Talk Off. At one point, the conversation turned lighthearted and someone asked Oprah what she would do if someone gave her baby chicks as a gift. Oprah laughed and said she would run them straight over to the Sussexes. But the way she said it came out as the Sussex Sex, a clumsy mispronunciation of their royal title that made the room burst out laughing. But here is what made that moment so significant. Oprah Winfrey is one of the most media-trained people alive. She does not make accidental slips in recorded settings. She stumbled over it because she was mocking them. She was sitting on a podcast in front of an audience and she turned Harry and Meghan into a punchline and everyone in that room laughed along with her. Then came the birthday. When Meghan's 2025 birthday came around, the celebration was small. A controlled Instagram post, a tight gathering, no sprawling A-list crowd. Oprah was not there. Not in the photo, not mentioned, not tagged. For a friendship that had appeared central to their post-royal life, her absence required no translation. Then came the brand launch. When Meghan launched her lifestyle brand as ever, her most ambitious solo commercial venture since leaving the palace, something strange happened. None of the famous friends posted about it. Not Oprah, not Tyler Perry, who had housed them when they first fled the UK. Not Amal and George Clooney, who had once been regulars in their social circle. Meghan had reportedly sent Oprah her famously curated gift baskets, monogrammed items, artisanal honey, the full treatment. Oprah did not post, did not acknowledge, said nothing. In influencer culture, not posting is not neutral. It is a decision. Then on a separate podcast, Oprah was asked to list her closest friends. She named Maria Shriver, Gayle King, her longtime trainer Bob Green, people she described as having been with her for decades. Meghan Markle and Prince Harry were not mentioned, not even with a passing, "We stay in touch." The people you name when asked about your inner circle are the people who matter. Meghan was not named. And all of this was happening against the backdrop of something even darker, allegations that had followed Meghan from London to Los Angeles and refused to let go. In October 2018, Jason Knopf, then Kensington Palace Communications Secretary, had sent an email to Prince William's private secretary, Simon Case. It read, "I am very concerned that the Duchess was able to bully 2 PAs out of the household in the past year. The treatment of X was totally unacceptable. The Duchess seems intent on always having someone